Well, for more on the Brexit negotiations, I'm joined by Brian Beary, Washington-based journalist, EU expert, and contributing editor to the online journal European Affairs. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Brian, we keep hearing this mix of kind of optimism, but also tinged with frustration. How would you describe the current state of negotiations?
My take is that it's a little more optimistic than it was a couple of months ago. Prime Minister May made an important speech last month in Florence where she made some concessions, and I think that brightened the mood somewhat in the EU Leaders Summit, particularly on the point you mentioned about the divorce bill. It wasn't that long ago that it seemed a surprise to the UK that they would have to pay anything to exit. And now it's really discussing how much and what is the method that you use to come up with an amount. So my sense is that the EU leaders are more comfortable, that in some ways the UK is getting on the same page that they kind of always were on.
So certainly nudging a little bit closer together, but both sides are still complaining about the speed of the negotiations. What are the biggest sticking points that you think are giving the most friction?
Well, again, the divorce bill is the #1 sticking point, and this is particularly frustrating for the United Kingdom government, who never wanted to sequence the negotiations in the sense of it wanted to talk about trade at the same time as the divorce bill. The EU won that on the procedural point, which is very important because the EU continues to say, we're not going to even talk about your access to our market until we agree the divorce bill. And so in many ways, the EU is still calling the shots.
Now, we know that the next round of talks may take place in December. What needs to happen, though, between now and then?
There's a lot of technical negotiations. The issue about citizenship rights, that's a very complex issue about British citizens in the EU, EU citizens, and not just them, but if they have family members, if they get married, what are those family members' rights? So technical issues like that. The North-South Ireland issue is extremely complicated to solve because nobody wants to erect a physical border between North and South. At the same time, the UK is leaving the customs union. And so these are very, very tricky issues for bureaucrats. But of course, the press will probably be paying most attention to the divorce settlement because at the end of the day, a number has to be agreed, whether it's 20 or 30 or 40 billion. So back in December, I would predict that's going to be making the headlines.
So there's still a lot of speculation at this point, but what would you say would be the best and worst case scenarios, both from the EU's perspective and the UK's?
I think for the UK, the worst case scenario is what is being referred to as a no-deal Brexit. So in other words, the EU just runs out the clock, and on the 29th of March 2019, the UK is out and it has zero access to the single market. That can happen. The UK is doing everything it can to get what it wants, what it calls a transition arrangement of 2 years. The difficulty is the EU is saying it won't even discuss that until they agree the divorce settlement first. So I again think that the EU kind of has the upper hand at the moment in the negotiations.
And what would you say from the EU's point of view would be the worst course that could happen for them?
I think from the EU perspective, for the talks to drag on and on and on, that would be bad. But again, they have the upper hand because the UK would have to request an extension of the 2-year negotiations. If there is no deal after 2 years, they are out. The EU member states dislike the uncertainty that the whole Brexit situation creates. So continued uncertainty would be bad for them because it could also encourage other EU member states to maybe follow the same path as they're watching their British friends doing the same.
Certainly a lot to untangle. Thank you so much, Brian Beary, journalist, EU expert and contributing editor to European Affairs.